Hari ini negara menyambut Ulangtahun Kemerdekaan yang ke-63 dan ia disambut dengan penuh kemeriahan dan rendah diri di tengah-tengah pandemik COVID-19 yang melanda dunia. Dan ketika ini, Corporate Malaysia dilaporkan ataupun melaporkan pendapatan sukuan mereka. Dan kita saksikan pada minggu lepas keuntungan syarikat seperti Hong Leong Bank, Sime Darby, Affin Bank, Nestle dan juga CIMB dilaporkan lebih rendah untuk suku berakhir Jun 2020. Dan tentunya ada juga syarikat yang mencatatkan peningkatan keuntungan seperti TM, Malakoff dan juga Duo Pharma. Tidak kurang juga yang mencatatkan kerugian termasuk DRB Highcom. Dan ini tentunya menunjukkan pandemik COVID-19 berikan kesan yang pelbagai kepada Corporate Malaysia. Di hari keramat Ulangtahun Merdeka ke-63 ini, kita ingin meninjau kepada Corporate Malaysia dan juga bagaimana syarikat ini akan bergerak ke hadapan di tengah pandemik COVID-19. Kita bersama tokoh korporat, Tan Sri Dr Munir Majid. Tan Sri Dr Munir Majid adalah bekas Pengerusi Bank Muamalat, Suruhanjaya Sekuriti, Celcom dan juga Malaysia Airlines serta pelbagai lagi jawatan dalam institusi pemantauan dan juga pelaburan seperti MIDA dan juga Bursa Malaysia. Dan kini Tan Sri Munir Majid menjawat jawatan pengurusi jawatan kuasa kerja respon COVID-19 dan pemulihan ekonomi dan pengurusi ASEAN BAC Malaysia. Thank you, Tan Sri, for joining us. Tan Sri, first of all, as someone who has a long experience in Corporate Malaysia, tell us your thoughts on the new norm and Corporate Malaysia and how Corporate Malaysia is facing the challenges ahead.
Ya, selamat pagi dan selamat menyambut Hari Kemerdekaan yang ke-63 kepada semua rakyat Malaysia. Dan sebagai jawapan ya soalan itu, what we can see is that this past 6 months, Malaysia has shown a great social discipline and responsibility and cohesion and organisation at governmental level to handle the COVID-19 crisis. I think we have to take our hats off to the government, which allowed the professionals to take the lead, in handling the health crisis, the public health crisis. And I think we are outstandingly successful up till now in this world. Our numbers are very good, in terms of especially recovery against the 9,000 plus cases. 97% recovery rate is very good. Deaths, deaths are bad, 126 and so on. So we have done very well. I think we should first of all recognize this and recognize the discipline that we have shown as a nation. Apart from the early days when people were trying to mummify themselves with toilet paper, in the buying after that panic. But we've done well. Of course, now with the recovery, MCO, and the recent announcement that it's going to go on till the end of this year, of course, people are getting a bit, some agitated, some very restless, especially in the economy, and of course in terms of personal travel and so on and so forth. So now the test now is going to be whether we can hold to that discipline and organisation to ensure that we come out. This thing's going to be around for a while. Even with the vaccine, there's so many strains of the pandemic, of the disease. The virus is about, some people say, 10 different strains. You get vaccinated, you may not necessarily, be protected from the other things. And countries will think how they want to limit travel and so on between them. So Malaysia was closed down, and economic activities were frozen, more or less. The whole world economy suffered this double whammy, of a freeze, both in supply and in demand. And everything's down. Malaysia was 17.1% down in terms of GDP in the last quarter. And India, for example, is going to announce, I think today, GDP, probably people expect minus 20%, in India. And everything's down. You look at Japan and so on. So essentially, whilst we have done well in managing the public health aspect of this COVID-19, there have been consequences in terms of the economic activity aspects. And so we should be ready to move on, but things are different. Everything's going to be slower. There's a one hand and on the other sort of situation. On the one hand, we want to grow. On the other, we don't want to grow with irresponsibility that will cause our workers to suffer, that will cause our economic activity to suffer as a result of a second or third wave of this virus. So we have to move slowly, but as surely as we can. You talk about the new normal, Rizal. I mean, I think this new normal is not everything that everyone has imbibed or internalized. The new normal has not quite happened yet, so we are still learning. About how to conduct ourselves and conduct business.
Speaking of learning, what are some of the new changes that Corporate Malaysia can probably adapt to face these new challenges, this new norm? You mentioned growth would be probably slower, very different era moving forward. What would be the most difficult to change when it comes to Corporate Malaysia?
Now, people say, of course, one of the things COVID-19 did on a very strategic level is to push harder towards digitalization. So things that we said we were going to do in terms of digitizing, corporate Malaysia, digitizing the Malaysian economy, we've pushed harder. We had to do it faster as a result of logistical needs, as a result of e-commerce deliveries, and so we have to, and so now we are moving faster towards digitization, and I think it's something Corporate Malaysia should do. I mean, I think there is a committee, actually. There's a committee called the Digital Malaysia Committee, which is part of the EAC, which has had some very good meetings, I understand, which the Prime Minister has chaired and is moving on, and they have identified like 26 or 25 blueprints for Malaysia to do. I hope it's not going to be words, some more. We're going to see implementation. So we have to look at what are the digital parts of the digital economy that we can adopt, and move on with. Of course, e-commerce is obviously one, that is so clear for us to do. But the other things, OECD, identifies, I've got in my notes here, 40 key technologies, digital technologies, and then divides it into 5 key areas. Energy technologies. We're talking about biotechnology. We're talking about environment, advanced materials, and then some people analyze that in countries like Malaysia's development level, at ASEAN level, for example, the things that are going to restructure the economies, the technologies that are going to restructure those economies and the industrial structure of the country and the trade pattern would be Internet of Things, big data analytics, artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, very important, and blockchain. So when these things, we have to adapt and take these things. For example, the government set aside really 3 billion under the Prihatin initiatives. 2 billion was supposed to be for reskilling, upskilling, all right, and 1 billion supposed to be for our poor, our very poor tourism businesses, right? Now, how we use money, what we do, it must be clearly identified, and to upskill and reskill, and so to help. In some instances, there are consequences. So I said there's always one on the one hand, and on the other, the consequences, employment. I mean, there will be employment displacement, let's face it. And therefore, what retraining do we do? Let's say employment displacement. You take e-learning or e-education as something that's going to grow, that's going to grow. So the growth means, with e-learning, that the back office support systems and people working in that will come down. That kind of employment will come down. On the other hand, the expansion of e-learning means more teachers will be involved, more lecturers will be involved, and more students are going to be doing it. Therefore, it's going to grow. So there's on the one hand and on the other. So this is the aspect of our next stage, economic growth, brought along by COVID, but hurried along when it was already happening. It was already a trend. The other trend is of course, relocation. We've talked about this before. The relocation of industries, and people talk about relocation from China because of the US-China trade war. But again, relocation was taking place even before the US-China trade war. And now they say, oh, it's happening because of COVID-19. It was taking place even before COVID-19. So this relocation took place because of lower costs and so on. You know, Chinese costs going up. Yet, it doesn't mean that we will automatically, coming to Malaysia, get the relocation unless we show that we can add value to investments that foreigners will bring here. And how do we add value? The most critical factor now in the kinds of industries we talk about to add value is human capital. We come back to people, you know, every time. Human capital development is critical as we try to change and accommodate and grow perhaps a slower level. Maybe it'll pick up after 2 years with COVID-19 coming to haunt us.
But speaking of human capital, surely we want to look also at corporate culture in Malaysia. As the chairman of these various businesses, I'm sure you can see or you saw what corporate culture is like in Malaysia. And has there been a strong shift because of COVID-19 to people becoming more productive? What is a bit more easy to change? What is harder to change? Do you see new leadership style coming out because of this and better ways to probably measure productivity?
I think corporate culture in Malaysia has improved, but it was terrible at one time. I think when I was Securities Commission chairman, you know, in '93, we had this upsurge in economic activities, but also upsurge in the market, you know, what was then called the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange. Corporate governance standards were horrible. That led to people running to the Prime Minister of the day, trying to get away from responsibilities in terms of issuance of securities, for which it was supposed to finance activities that were declared but not really used to finance those activities and so on. It was a hell. So, when all these things happened, I mean, I gave the first draft of the code of Malaysian corporate governance to the previous Prime Minister at that time, Sri Dr Mahathir, about why we must, you know, be strict about corporate governance. And he, of course, you know, because it's Western in nature, had a predisposition against it. And so the argument that won the day was, I said, in the stock market, companies with better corporate governance have a higher price in terms of PE ratios because they're valued by investors as, you know, responsible managers. So that was very important to improve corporate governance. The second thing that has improved, has been the management of banks. You know, banking system. The banks were not looking at the risks they were taking on, the assets they were giving out sufficiently enough, and the capital that they had, you know, to support that expansion. That Banegara has done a wonderful job improving it. So we have capital buffers, we have this and that. So that has also improved. Now, what about management of the business per se? Your main point. The management of the business has become more responsible. Trade unions have also become stronger, and you take into account the fact that you must also serve the stakeholders. It used to be just shareholders, right? Now we talk stakeholders, and that includes the environment. That includes use of resources and use of human capital resources and recognizing value. And one thing that will happen from COVID-19 is I will recognize value, but you have to deliver it not necessarily in the office. So I was involved just recently, you know, as chairman of remuneration committee of one of companies, Silver Lake actually, you know, which is a technology company, to look at whether there's been an improved or a diminished level of productivity as a result of working from home. And we found it's improved. So, you know, you can measure that, and why not, you know, work from home? You look internationally, I mean, BP has just sold its headquarters in London, but it's got a sale and leaseback arrangement, but it plans to pull out about 6,500 people at headquarters 2 years down the road out of it, so that they will work from home or they work from smaller units and so on. So things are changing and at so many different levels, and we have to go with the flow and be as committed and organized as we have been so far.
Tan Sri, let's take a short break. When we come back, let's talk about that tenure at the Securities Commission. You also witnessed the ASEAN financial crisis in 1997, 1998. And what wisdom and insights could you share with corporate Malaysia these days when it comes to going through that very difficult period and coming out stronger? Let's talk about that when we come back shortly. Kita akan berehat seketika, kembali selepas ini. Dan bertemu kembali kita bersama dengan Tak Sri Dr Munir Majid, tokoh korporat dan juga pengerusi ASEAN BAC Malaysia untuk membincangkan berkenaan dengan korporat Malaysia. Seterusnya Tan Sri, let's talk about ASEAN and also the Asian financial crisis. You witnessed that as a chairman of the Securities Commission. What insights and what wisdom do you have that you can share with corporate Malaysia out there to wade through this very difficult period right now?
Okay, we have mentioned need for good corporate governance, serving the stakeholder, the employees as well, and not just the capital holders, right? And then, okay, we've talked about professional management. Now, I think the other lesson is financial management. Financial management and not borrowing beyond your means. So this was what started the attack on the baht, because there was a lot of borrowing in US dollars, and Malaysia was also involved, Malaysian companies in US dollars, which could not be financed by US dollar revenue. So if you're doing a domestic business, you don't have the US dollar revenue to service, and especially if the borrowing was huge, like in Thailand, particularly Malaysia also, but not as huge as Thailand. As in Thailand, a lot of it went into the property business, and of course stocks and shares as well. And so, when these currency speculators or manipulators, when they see, your currency, you're needing to buy, you're needing to buy dollars to serve it, huge, interest payments, they attack those currencies to get it. And of course, in Malaysia's case, Soros was supposed to have, attacked the Malaysian. Actually, I was at a meeting that I organized subsequently between Soros and Dr. Mahathir, in which Soros said to Dr. Mahathir, you accused me of speculating against Malaysian ringgit. I did not do so. And Mahathir said, just say yes. I speculated against the Thai baht, So which he did. I mean, they all do these things. They attack the currency. So that is one other important lesson, from the Asian financial crisis. Don't expose yourself to currency risk beyond your capability to service your currency. Now, as we borrow in COVID-19 and so on, so I was being very observant about where we're borrowing, how much we borrow. So I think in Malaysia's case right now, we're doing very well because our borrowing is domestic. And the financing for the Prihatin packages is a reallocation of funds from other ministries to this purpose of serving the rakyat and shoring up, the hurt, the damaged economy. And we were able to do so because some of the allocations were for things that cannot happen. Visit Malaysia year, for example. Billions usually allocated for this sort of things, but it can be reallocated and so on. They did a lot of the reallocation. At the end of the day, the Malaysian need, for the refinancing was about 40 billion or so, right? 35, 40 billion is actual need. But the banking system is flush with funds, and we are able to do so. The banks are able to do so. But on the one hand, banks are financing those who are in trouble at both corporate and individual levels. On the other hand, they will slowly have to be financing government. So that spending of the borrowed money must, and domestic good, but that spending must be disciplined. There must be no corruption, no leakages, because then we get into trouble. And the governments get into trouble, banks get into trouble, and then you'll be sort of, inciting a banking crisis. We don't want that. We have a COVID crisis, we have an economic crisis, we have a banking crisis on top of that. We do not want it. Therefore, when we talk just now about social discipline and cohesion and cooperation, it applies right down, through our society, through the system. And therefore, it's very important, not to forget responsibilities.
Tan Sri, let's talk about ASEAN. I know you're very passionate about ASEAN. ASEAN leaders have recently committed to signing RCEP by the end of this year. But I think recently, Tan Sri Tony Fernandez, Asia Group founder, stated that has called for Southeast Asian economies to open their international borders, warning that failure to do so would only result in more layoffs for the budget carrier. And we know that ASEAN and Asia have played a huge role in connecting ASEAN. As a former chairman of Malaysia Airlines, tell us more of your thoughts on that.
Well, RCEP, let's talk about RCEP. Last Thursday, the ASEAN economic ministers met the +5 who are going to form RCEP. I don't think they have really settled on this notion that was reported, that they would try to sign, at least, although it won't come into effect after this, to sign RCEP by November, when the ASEAN leaders have their next summit. That was last Thursday. Last Monday, I made a presentation to the ASEAN economic ministers, and this is critical that RCEP takes place, okay? It's critical because economies have shrunk. The whole world economy has shrunk. Demand has disappeared. Europe, US and so on. Where is the demand going to come from? Everyone looks at China and rushing to the door to get to China. That's not sufficient. We have to rebuild our economies, and ASEAN integration, RCEP, the subsequent integration, must take place to give the growth. You're talking about, 3 trillion or whatever, 2.3, 2.4 trillion. And plus, think 1/3 of world output is RCEP. And therefore, you want to encourage that as the world output has. So it's very important to do it, integrate, and be strict about it, serious about it. Now, we have also proposed that ASEAN decision-making slow. Leaders meet twice a year, normally. How can they decide? They rush every time they meet. So we say there should be a high-level commission to make decisions. This high-level commission is not interfering in the happy ASEAN, processes and working groups. I got one meeting tomorrow with something called ACCWGPHE. Okay, can you guess what it is?
No. Is that a proper word or just an acronym for that?
ASEAN Coordinating Council Working Group on Public Health Emergencies. We have a lot of these sort of stuff. But we say, put this commission, special commission, as an exco of the leaders' meeting. Have the leaders' right-hand man be there. Let them meet once every month.
Decisions can be made faster and
to make faster, because we have a crisis. Indonesia is facing a huge problem, and the worst is Philippines, in terms of the numbers. Hence, because Indonesia has got a proposal that they are trying to push through, coming back to your point about traveling, to have these corridors, these ASEAN travel corridors. We can work on it because there's already this arrangement now between Malaysia and Singapore.
Yes.
On reciprocal green lanes, on commuting arrangements, which means you can use, that basic arrangement and then multiply it, multilateralize it for ASEAN. Now, what are the problems? The problems, I trust your doctors, you trust my doctors. You have done a test. Do I believe your test is any good? And this is the thing. I don't believe that you have done it. So we have to have confidence. That's why we say you must have common standards. If it's going to be Singapore doctors, like an A-team, an ASEAN A-team of Singapore doctors, doing all these tests, coming in, going out, so be it. Then everyone is able to travel, and if it's Malaysian doctors or a combination of the top, the top-ranked tests, then we can make it happen. The problem is confidence and belief.
Okay. Tan Sri, briefly before we end this interview, we have about 1 minute left. Talk to us and share with us how Corporate Malaysia can benefit from ASEAN working together faster, stronger, and surviving this pandemic together instead of just in silos, different countries, different corporate culture.
Yeah, I think they have to be more active. At the moment, people like us, working in ASEAN back, we sometimes tired out because of tons of meetings, and they have to make representations. Like FMM Malaysia, they said that can we have an ASEAN manufacturers network? We've taken it up at ASEAN Business Advisory Council level, and I think it's very good. If I can cooperate with you as a manufacturer, and you tell me what were the supply chain problems that you face, disruptions that you face. Or I can tell you who were the suppliers who were able to give the supplies. Of course, normally I want to keep it to myself because I've got good rates, blah, 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 blah. But when you're all facing the similar problem, you should share more information for the supply chain, for the parts, components, suppliers, so that the whole industry, whatever particular industry it is, be it motor car or whatever, manufacturing industry, you can work together. You have to cooperate more at the ASEAN level to make it happen. And secondly, you've got to tell your governments, non-tariff barriers, we have said there should be a moratorium on non-tariff measures for at least 12 months in ASEAN. So that would help generate trade, it becomes a single market and production base.
Thank you very much on that note, Tan Sri Dr Munir Majid, tokoh Corporate Malaysia dan juga pengerusi ASEAN BAC Malaysia membincangkan berkenaan dengan Corporate Malaysia dan juga ulang tahun ke-63 kemerdekaan dan bagaimanakah Corporate Malaysia boleh bergerak ke hadapan mengharungi COVID-19, dan ini adalah Awani Pagi yang kami bawakan khas sempena dengan Hari Kemerdekaan ke-63. Saya Rizal Zulkafli, salam hormat.